In the last episode, we talked about the tensions starting to form in the alliance between the Ming and the Chosun. Now we head back to Seoul, where the negotiations between the Chinese and Japanese are about to take place. I'm Stefan, and this is Japan at War. Before the negotiations had taken place, the daimyo in Seoul had just received orders from Hideyoshi to fall back to Busan. Now, this was actually great news for the Japanese, as the Ming negotiators had no idea of this, and the Japanese would be able to use their evacuation as a concession in the negotiations and use this to their advantage. Shen Weijing and a small group of Ming Generals left from Kaesong to Seoul on May 8th. On the way there, they stopped at a Korean camp at Paju. Kim Young-won was there and confronted Shen and let him know that all Koreans disapproved of these negotiations and that the Japanese had already fooled them at Pyongyang before, and they had slipped away. But if you'll remember, the plan for the Ming was to get the Japanese to leave Seoul without further bloodshed. So this would actually be fine to them, whether the Koreans knew it or not. On the 9th, Shen and his entourage continued by boat to Seoul on the Han River, with the Wanli Emperor's banner on full display. They arrived at a food depot and were met by Konishi Yukinaga and Kato Kiyomasa. There were other daimyo in attendance as well, but I've actually had a pretty difficult time identifying them. They then sat down to start the talks. The Ming, right before they had arrived, had received intel that the Japanese were in a desperate situation. With this knowledge, Shen decided that he would be a lot more aggressive than he had been in his previous talks with Konishi. He started by saying that the Ming will bring 400,000 men to surround you if you stay in Seoul. Give up the 2 Korean princes and all captured officials and retreat south. Do this or be slaughtered. What do you choose? While the Japanese certainly knew that they couldn't remain in the area, they also knew that the Ming were looking to avoid further bloodshed, or else why would these meetings even be happening? So Konishi thought about it and responded, "This is possible, and we are looking to reach an agreement with Ming China. First, we need a sign of sincerity, of a desire for peace. If you can bring an envoy with the authority to negotiate on behalf of your emperor, well, we can go from there." Shen Weijing left with the promise to return shortly to discuss it further. There was a problem though. They didn't have any envoy with them with this kind of authority. When Shen told this to his commander Li Rusong, well, he didn't see the problem. He simply took 2 of his men from his staff, gave them high official robes, and then sent them with Shen. Shen then appeared before the Japanese again with the men posed as imperial envoys. Konishi Yukinaga was satisfied with this, and a deal was then signed. In 10 days, the Japanese would leave Seoul and march south. They would also release the 2 princes Imhei and Sunhwa once they were south. The Ming would hold all troops at their current location until the Japanese were away. Shen Weijing and the imperial envoys would also go with the Japanese south, and from there to Nagoya to discuss terms with Hideyoshi for peace. It was even suggested by Shen that the Japanese would be able to keep a portion of Korea. The ironclad gates of Seoul opened on the morning of May 19th, and the Japanese armies began marching out. Near the front was Shen Weijing and the 2 imperial envoys. Behind them was the numerous Japanese commanders watching them. The retreat, it has been said, was not a depressing one, but instead was actually closer to that of a parade, with music being played, banners and battle standards on full display, and dancers dancing on either side of the marching columns. It was said that the noise was so loud that it filled the mountains and the fields as they marched. While this happened, Commander-in-Chief of the Allied armies, Li Rusong, made no attempt to pursue them. He was actually with most of his army at Tongpa, just south of the Imjin River, and just a day's march from Seoul. But he refused to move, even though the Koreans kept insisting that now that the Japanese had been tricked into leaving, they can finally be wiped out. Li Rusong wouldn't have any of it, and he told Yu Song-nyang and Kim Myung-won, who were very insistent at the time that now was the time to attack, that Japan could become vassals and peace was imminent. They responded by saying, "If our country had wanted peace, we would not have waited until now. They have offered us peace before, several times." They were of course referring to the offers of peace that Kunishi Yukinaga had made before. Of course, they didn't know that Kunishi really didn't have the authority to make any of these offers, so peace wouldn't have come had they taken them. Throughout the week, Li Rusong heard similar pleas over and over, and every time he brushed them aside. He was accomplishing all his goals of getting the Japanese away from the Chinese border. Around the same time that this was happening, a 5,000-man army was actually crossing over into Korea under the command of a Sichuan Ming General, Liu Ting. And apart from his own soldiers, which were Sichuan, there was also Thai soldiers and other men from Southeast Asia. Liu Ting marched his men past Pyongyang and into Li Rusong's camp. Like I said before, this really was the Asian World War. On May 20th, the Allied armies marched into Seoul. What they saw was, well, a shocking sight. The city was in ruins. First there was the fires from the riot when the Korean king had fled, and then there was the long occupation of the Japanese itself. Yu Song-nyang is said to have written this about his experience walking into the city. "When I entered into the once glorious capital with the Ming soldiers, I barely saw any civilians alive. The few that I did see were all starving. Their faces were sunken in, they were sick and looked like ghosts. The weather had already grown hot. The dead bodies of men and horses that were all over the city had begun to rot, and the smell was just so bad that many of us could not breathe." Li Rusong tried to actually comfort Yu Song-nyang by saying that the only thing holding him back from chasing the Japanese down was the fact that there was just no boats at the Han River to cross. Yu responded that if he would agree to pursue the enemy, he would make sure that there was boats for the men to cross. Li agreed, finally. The Ming did actually go to the Han, but they actually turned back around when the commander-in-charge complained about feeling ill. So, of course, they would have to turn around. Yu Song-nyang realized that this was just Li stalling again for more time. And this is where I will leave you. The Japanese pulling out from Seoul, and the Allied army realizing that the once glorious capital is no longer glorious. I'll see you next time.